Shalom, Akim Shalom. Before I begin this lesson, I want to start off by giving all glory, honor, and praises to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachakwarash, and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught us His truth. A sincere shalom to the hopeful elect that's out there listening, learning, and or teaching. Shalom to you all. All right, so today's lesson is going to be about, who are the Jews and the Gentiles in the New Testament. All right, most people don't even know who the real Jews are. Okay, but we're going to go into it today. And this lesson is inspired by the book Marks of a Lost Race by Abba Bivens, who we believe to be John the Baptist in the reincarnation. All right, so without any further ado, we're just going to jump right into it. All right, I got this depiction pulled up here for a reason. Okay, just basically showing you a depiction. And we're going to refer back to this depiction as we go into the scriptures, as we break it down and uncover the mystery of the Jews and the Gentiles in the scriptures. Okay, so first we want to start with some history. This book was removed from the Bible by Esau Edom, the so-called white man, in order to hide the truth. Okay, and many truths are hidden when you remove these books called the Apocrypha. Okay, and basically it leaves holes in the story, which allows people to twist the scriptures and create their own doctrine, which is what the modern day Christian church has done. The Catholic Church, which is the false prophet, the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, what do they say? They say that the Gentiles in the New Testament represent the other races, also known as the heathen, which, if you read the Old Testament, it tells you that the Lord was not dealing with the heathen at all, but only with the Israelites. Okay, so what these people have done is they hijacked the Bible in order to paint their own narrative. And, we can make lessons upon lessons about all the different things they did. Among others, they changed the image of the Lord from a so-called black man to a so-called white man through, changing history, all right, painting these, or putting up these false images, okay, and, what else did they do? They say that, the law is done away with. They've done a lot of these things, but the one we're going to focus on today, without getting too off track, is how they say that these Gentiles that you read about in the New Testament, that those are, everybody else that's not the Israelites, right? The so-called Chinese, the so-called white man, the so-called Indians over there, the East Indians, right? The so-called Africans, the so-called Arabs, so on and so forth, right? And who are the Israelites today? All right, we know that those are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians. Okay, but without any further ado, let's get into the history so we can understand the mystery. Okay, this is the book of 1 Maccabees chapter 1. Okay, we're going to read verse 1 real quick. It says, "And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chetim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece." Okay, so what you see happening here, okay, is Alexander the Great, all right, basically becoming king of the Greeks, and this is the beginning of the Greek Empire. This is the beginning of the so-called white man's rulership. Okay, and what did he do? We're going to go down to verse 15, or Salakia, verse 10, and we're just going to start there just for time's sake. It says, "And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes," which that's Antiochus the Fourth. All right, give me just 1 second. Yeah, that's Antiochus the Fourth. Okay, surnamed Epiphanes, and son of Antiochus the king, who had been an hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. All right, so now we're getting into the history of it, man. So, you had Alexander the Great, all right? Then some time later, you had Antiochus, all right, which is a so-called white man. And what he do? Let's read. Verse 11, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen. So right there, you had wicked Israelites, Jake, who, when Antiochus was in charge, they decided, man, let's go make a deal with them, and what is a good example of that in the modern time is you got these rappers who sell their souls. Okay, that's a good example of it. Okay, and there's other examples, but you could just think about it, man. These people, these Jakes, sold themselves out, all right, for riches, for comfort, right? They didn't want to follow the ways of Yahweh Bashim Rashai, so they went to Antiochus, all right? So it says, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen, right, which are the other nations that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device, which a device is a plan, pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. All right, so a lot of Israelites were wicked, and they signed the covenants with, they sold their soul basically to go follow the ways of the heathen, basically to go become Greek, become like the Greeks. And so, Antiochus gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathens. Basically Antiochus had power during this time. Our people went to the heathens and started following their ways, okay? Just to keep it simple. Verse 14, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. The place of exercise is talking about a gymnasium, all right? And if you go into the word gymnasium, let's get it real quick. Gymnasium, okay, what does it mean? A place of exercise, from Latin school for gymnastics, from Greek gymnasium, a public place where athletic exercise are practiced. Gymnastic school, in plural, bodily exercises. To exercise or train, literally or figuratively, to train naked, okay, because we know that the Greeks were big into men sleeping with men, women sleeping with women, that Moism. Okay, the same thing you saw in Rome, the same thing you see here in America. Okay, these Mo rights, that's the so-called white man's thing. That's big with the so-called white man. Okay, so our people were building these gymnasiums, man. You see, following the ways of the heathen, following the ways of the so-called white man. So now going back to First Maccabees chapter 1, and where were we? Verse 14. Yeah. Yep, that exercise, the place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, right? Which means they stopped following the law. Okay, that's why the scriptures talk about the circumcision and the uncircumcision. It says, and forsook the holy covenant, right? What was the covenant? When the Israelites were with Moses in the wilderness, and Yahweh gave them the commandments, and Moses had sprinkled the blood over the Israelites, they made a promise to Yahweh. We made a promise with Yahweh, the Heavenly Father, okay? And you could read about that, the curses and the blessings of that promise in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, okay? It says, and joined themselves to the heathen and were sold, right? Sold, because they sold their souls, basically, man. You know, that's a good way of thinking about it. To do mischief, right? So they were sold to do mischief. Okay, so you can understand they basically sold their soul to these so-called white people in order to get freedom, riches, power, and things like that they didn't have before. Just comfort. Jake wants to feel good. Jake doesn't want to go through the pain. A lot of times, Jake is not thinking, what's ultimately the greater good. Jake just wants to feel good right now, and boom, they fucked up. They did this, so our people during this time became Hellenized, man. Because if you read further into this, all right, there was a lot of pressure from Antiochus, these Edomites, for our people to become like the Greeks. They wanted to stop Jews from being Jews, man. And there's a rich history that goes into great detail in how there was basically wars fought over this, man. Because these so-called white people wanted to push their heathenistic ways on our people by force. All right, and so blood had to be shed, and so ultimately, long story short, you had Judas Maccabeus. That's why this book is called the Book of the Maccabees, and it talks about how he stood 10 toes down for Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai. And basically they fought wars, and they put heathens to death, and their own people to death who wanted to follow the heathens. Man, it was an all-out war, and ultimately you had two groups of people that were both Israelites. You had the Israelites who stayed true to the Lord, right? Those are the ones who call themselves Jews in the New Testament, and the ones who fell away and became like the heathens, and those are the ones who the Bible will call Gentiles. Okay, are they actually Gentiles? No, they're Gentiles. They're in the Gentile state of mind. Okay, it's almost like if you're talking to somebody and you call somebody a snake, because they lied to you. Does that mean that they're a physical snake, like an animal? No, it's a figure of speech. Okay, and the more you go into the history, the more clear it makes sense. All right, but we're going to get into it a little bit. And just to give you some context, I wrote here in Google, just for time's sake, from the time of Antiochus Epiphanes until Paul, how many generations passed? All right. It says in the AI overview, there were approximately 6 to 10 generations from the time of Antiochus Epiphanes to the time of the Apostle Paul. So you can imagine when the Apostle Paul is having these conversations in the New Testament with the Jews, right, whose forefathers fought to the death against the heathen, okay, and he was trying to convince them that, look, these Gentiles, which are our own people, the sellouts, the people that sold their souls and actually fought against us, okay, the Lord is going to bring them back to the fold. And so that's what that whole, back and forth was about. You had certain Jews that didn't want to go with it, and the Lord, the scriptures talk about how the Lord provoked the Jews to jealousy. All right, because ultimately, these Israelites had to come back to the fold too. All right, and then of course you also had the northern kingdom, which that's another history we got to go into, man. This is why it's important to understand the Bible. Okay, how are you going to open up the New Testament? That's damn near the end of the Bible, and think you're going to understand it without knowing any of the history prior? And of course you're going to read a word like the word Gentile or Greek and think it's talking about an actual Greek without knowing what's being said. What's the story behind it? Why are they calling themselves Gentiles, man? Because the scripture says they were Jews, and we're going to go into that. Okay? But 6 to 10 generations of acting like another person, like a whole nother nation of people. Of course, they're not going to know their own laws. They're not going to probably remember too much of their own language. They're not going to remember their heritage. They're not going to remember their customs, their culture. Nothing, man. It's basically going to look like two different races of people. Of course, they looked alike, but they did not act alike at all. And that's why I have this picture embodying two completely different personalities, that are nothing alike. But you see, it's the same people. They're both Israelites of the tribe of Judah, right? You had Judah, Benjamin, Levi, certain ones that went and became heathens, right? You had a sprinkle of the northern kingdom that was still over there, although most of them were here in America, okay? And Yahushua even went to them over here in America and brought them back. But that's a whole nother lesson, you know? So with that being said, let's go ahead. Yeah, so 6 to 10 generations, you could imagine that our people are very different, man. And we're going to grab a quick example from today. Just a very quick example. So y'all can see what I'm talking about, man. It's not hard. You know, okay, this is a so-called Mexican American. Okay, notice how he looks very Americanized. Now, over here we have a Mexican, so-called Mexican, who's in his natural Mexican environment. And you can see a complete difference in these two people. This guy just looks like a white guy from America, of course, with the appearance of a Mexican, but he's got that American culture, American spirit and mindset. And over here, you got the guy that, you know, these two guys, they met each other, man, and they were having a conversation. This guy would be telling this guy, you know, you're American, basically. You know, you're not like us. You know, I know you're from Mexico, and this guy would be speaking English, and this guy would be speaking Spanish. You know, that's just so you can understand, you know, for those of you that are new, for, you know, that's basically like how it was, man. Because, you know, myself being a so-called Puerto Rican of the tribe of Ephraim, you know, my father also oftentimes told me, you know, because he had to learn English, and his English is not very good. I mean, it's good, but it's not perfect, right? And but he mainly speaks Spanish, and he always told me, you know, oh, you're American. Like when we're having casual conversations, he'll be like, you know, you're gonna do good in school because you're American. You know what you're taught. You know English and this, that, and the third. So if somebody who didn't understand the situation heard my conversation with my father, they would be like, oh, well, this doesn't make sense because the father's Puerto Rican, but the son is American. You know, you see, somebody in the future would be reading that and they wouldn't understand the context, and they would think, well, you know, maybe he just, you know, morphed into a different race. You see? And that's the same crazy mindset that these wacky tacky Christians have with the scriptures. You know, the whole Bible was written for the Israelites. All right, it even tells you the Lord is only dealing with the Israelites. We've made a 101 videos on it. You know, 1,000,001 videos on that. You can search up my channel and just, if you want to watch that first, go ahead and watch that first, then come back to this, man. But, you know, the whole Bible literally screams it's all about Israel. But now, all of a sudden, you got the wacky tacky Christian church breaking down the scriptures wrong because they don't understand the history. Trying to act like, oh, well, now the Gentiles can get saved too. You know, the same Gentiles that had us in slavery, man. The real Gentiles. Who are the real Gentiles? Is these other heathen nations, right? Not to be mistaken with the Gentiles in the New Testament, man. All right, we're just gonna call them the heathen. The heathen, or these other wicked races of people out here that had our people in slavery, man. Okay. But with that, we're going to go into this word Hellenization, man, so you can understand. It says Hellenization or Hellenification is the adoption of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks. So you see other people, for example, like we were just reading, the Israelites, okay, during Antiochus' rule, were being Hellenized. They were being forced to adopt the Greek ways. Okay, it says in the ancient period, colonization, right? We already talked about the colonization of the Americas and how brutal and murderous these Spaniards were, these so-called white people were to the Hispanics and Native Americans here, okay, and how they were to the so-called black man as well during the time of the transatlantic slave trade, right? That's that colonization. Right? The same thing happened back then, man. Right? That's why our people were calling themselves Greeks, okay? Because they literally were forced to become and act like Greeks, okay? It says colonization often led to the Hellenization of indigenous people In the Hellenistic period, many of the territories which were conquered by Alexander the Great were Hellenized. You see? And the Israelites, especially, man, I got the, let's see. I got the Zondervan Bible Dictionary right here in front of me. And I'm on I'm on page 223. Okay? And I'm going to read to you the definition of the word Hellenists. It says, Jews who made Greek their tongue, right? Which means language. And with it often adopted Greek ideas and practices. You see? So, our people were heavy into this culture. And as you can imagine, they became basically like a whole nother race, man. And the Jews who stayed true to their heritage despised these other Jews who lost their heritage and instead began to call themselves Greeks. Okay, and so if they're gonna act like a Greek, our people were calling them Greeks. Okay, and that's what you see recorded in the scriptures, man. You can imagine wars were fought by blood on this. Salakiv, my tongue is slipping. It's been a long day. Wars were fought and blood was shed. It was a very serious situation. Okay? So, the Jews who stood 10 toes down and basically, held up that standard and risked their lives, they lost all respect for the Jews who went and sold their souls and became like the Greeks. So to them, it was like, you're a whole nother race of people. You're just like the heathens that we despise. So, to hell with y'all. And that's why they were calling them Gentiles, man. They might as well be Gentiles. It's like, it's like, I'll give you a perfect example, man. With ICE right now, that's attacking the so-called Hispanic tribes. Let's say a so-called Mexican becomes a member of ICE and starts deporting other Mexicans, man. Well, you can imagine the Mexicans are gonna be like, man, you not a real Mexican, man. You not a real Mexican. You an American. You a gringo. You a white man. That's what you are. You're a colonizer. Because the emotions were high. The tensions were high, man. You got to understand that history. So now, we just read about Hellenization, Hellenists. Okay? We're going to go into Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. I'm going to give you an example of where it talks about this in the scriptures, man. All right, where it uses that word. All right, this is Acts 6 and 1. And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Now, if someone reads this at face value, they think, okay, it's talking about Greeks, like actual Greeks, so-called white people. All right, but no, these are also Jews, man. These are Jews and these are Jews, okay? Or these are Israelites and these are also Israelites. We're going to go into it. Let's get the word Grecian. All right, and this is why you got to understand the meaning of words. Grecians, G1675, there's that word Hellenistes. You see it, Hellenistes? It sounds like Hellenization or Hellenification or Hellenists. Okay?
Strong's G1675, Hellenistes. Hellenistes.
Hellenistes, which means what? A Hellenist, which we just read the definition in that book, the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. But we're going to see what definition we got here. It says, one who imitates the manners and customs of the worship of the Greeks. So just off this alone, it can't be talking about Greeks, because Greeks don't imitate Greeks. It says, and use the Greek tongue used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. You see? So there you go, man. All right, our people, this was a very recent history that we read here in the Maccabees, where our people were colonized and forced to learn Greek. Okay? And some of our people voluntarily went over there as well. Okay, well, you can imagine in the Roman Empire, the same thing was happening. That's why you got all these different books. You got Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians. Okay, is it talking about all these different Edomites? No, it's talking about our people who were among the heathens, man. All right. Let's get into the scriptures here. We're gonna go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 1, and I'm gonna prove it. All these different books, the Corinthians, all right, the Romans, the book of James, all these books, it tells you, you know, that it's for the Israelites. And it doesn't even have to tell you, because you should already know it's for the Israelites. But anyway, we're gonna get into it. This is 1 Corinthians 1 and 1. Paul, called to be an apostle of Yahushai Mashiach, through the will of the Most High, and Sosthenes our brother, unto the church of the Most High, which is at Corinth. Okay, so this letter, this book is being written to the church of the Most High at Corinth. All right, it continues. To them that are sanctified in Mashiach Yahushai, called to be saints. So that's who the book is written to. Those who are called to be saints. All right, who are the saints? All right, this is why you got to go precept on precept and know what the Bible is referring to as a saint. Let's get it. This is Psalms chapter 50 and verse 5. Gather my saints together unto me, those who have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Oh, okay, you see that? Okay, so the saints of the Most High are those who made a covenant with him by sacrifice. All right, and we know that those are the Israelites, right? You could read the Old Testament during the times of Moses, you know, the animal sacrifices we were doing. Okay, who were those people it was referring to? The Israelites, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Okay, so as you can see, those are the saints, right? Those are the saints. So now going back to 1 Corinthians 1 and 2. Okay, Paul is writing this book to the saints that are in Corinth, right? Unto the church of the Most High, which is at Corinth, to them that are sanctified by Mashiach Yahushai, called to be saints, right? Israelites in Corinth, with all that in every place call upon the name of Yahushai Mashiach, our Lord, both theirs and ours. Boom, right there. So anytime you read Gentile, it's talking about a Israelite who is acting or has become accustomed to the cultures of another nation. Okay, I'm gonna get an example of that. Let's go to actually, this is a good example that explains that. 1 Corinthians 12 and 1. It says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant. You know that you were Gentiles. So remember, we just read, okay, 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, this whole book is written to those that are called to be saints, which are Israelites. So right here, Salakia, right here, 1 Corinthians 12 and 2, Paul is saying, you know that you were Gentiles. So he's speaking to the Israelites, telling them that we were Gentiles. You know, because these Israelites here are who would be called the Gentiles, because they're the ones that decided to go live, right, like these other nations. But then through the blood of Yahushai, they were able to come back to the fold. Okay, and so Paul is reminding them, you were a Gentile. Okay, but now you came back to your heritage. Hey, this is the same thing we do with these videos, man. We're teaching you how to come back to your heritage. We're telling you, if you're a so-called black man, Latino man, Native American, Indian man, stop calling you yourself black, Latino, Native American. No, you're of the tribe of Judah. You're of the tribe of Benjamin. You're of the tribe of Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, so on and so forth. Okay, and your native tongue is Hebrew. And your God, your power is Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai. Right? You see, The same thing we're doing today is what Paul, and Yahushua was doing back then, man, trying to bid our people back to their heritage, man. Because what is the theme throughout the Bible? We end up serving idols. Then the Lord punishes us. How? By sending us into slavery at the hand of our enemies. Who are our enemies? These heathen nations out here. Okay, the other heathen nations. Or the heathen nations, right? And they're the ones worshiping all these other idols. So we end up going through slavery to them and serving their gods while we're in slavery to them. You see? Losing our heritage, man. All right? And so the Lord had to bring our people back. All right? Let's see. Lost my place here. All right, yeah, let's read 1 Corinthians 12 and 2 again. You know that you were Gentiles, carried away into these dumb idols, right? The idols, they don't speak, they don't move, they're pointless. All right? Even as ye were led, right? So we were carried away into these dumb idols, acting like these heathen, like these Gentiles, man. The time of the Greeks were polytheistic. They believe in multiple gods. Same thing with the Romans. They believed in, what was that? The god of the sea, the god of the sky, the god of this, the god of that. You see? So our people were following these idols, following these ways. Okay, but, through the blood of Yahushua, both the Jews and the Greeks can receive salvation through faith. And the Jews had to learn that, because they were so focused on the law, because why? Because of this history right here, man. At that time, that was the right move, to focus on the law. Okay? But then when Yahushua came, they had to let go of that obsession with technicalities of the law, and I want to make sure I say this carefully, man, to not be misunderstood. We absolutely uphold the law and keep it to the best of our ability, man. But we understand now that it's through faith in Yahushua that we're going to be saved, not by keeping the law perfect. All right? Even though we uphold it and we are in complete agreement that the law is good. All right? But that we are sold unto sin. And so, that's that weak flesh. And again, Yahushua is going to save us from that weak flesh. Okay? When he returns. That's part of the promises. And if you read Romans chapter 9, it tells you those promises are only for the Israelites. All right? But then in the same book, chapter 11, it talks about the Gentiles and the Jews again, right? And it's not a contradiction. It's just, you just got to understand what's being said and why it's being said, man. And then it all makes perfect sense. You see? And that's why the elders and apostles and the men on down of Great Millstone, we have the 100% truth out here. I would only camp teaching 100% truth. All right? Now some of these other camps will teach some truth, but, they go off, all right? And not it goes without saying, the wacky tacky Christian church is all the way in left field, man. All right? Let's get the next precept here. All right? So with that understanding we just read in Corinthians, we're going to read John 7 and 33. Then Yahushua said unto them, Yet a little while am I with you, and then I go unto him that sent me. Ye shall seek me, and shall not find me, and where I am, thither you cannot come. Then said the Jews among themselves, Whither will he go? Right? Where's he gonna go? That we shall not find him. Right? Where's Yahushua gonna go that we can't find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles? You see that? Because our people were dispersed. Our people were scattered. The scripture said we would be in all these different nations scattered throughout, man. Let's get that word dispersed. Bear with me. Baba Kushah. Salakia. Dispersed. Here we go. G1290. Diaspora. Okay.
Strong's G1290. Diaspora. Diaspora.
Diaspora. in the Greek. All right. A scattering, a dispersion. Okay, right, because our Israelites were scattered. Of Israelites dispersed among foreign nations. That's right. It's clear as day. And even just the fact that we're reading this in Greek, man. You know, our scriptures were written in Greek because so many of our people knew Greek. You know, and you had that Greek Empire, right? Then you had the Roman Empire, right? So as you can see, okay, you got to understand that history to understand why they were calling themselves that. All right, look up the word diaspora, the dispersion or spread of a people from their original homeland, right? We weren't all just in Jerusalem, man. We were scattered, and when you get scattered and you live somewhere for more than 10 fucking generations, you're not going to be acting like the original people anymore. So the original people do not claim you a lot of times, man. That's a typical thing, right? Just like in a modern time, the so-called Mexican from Mexico versus an Americanized Mexican. All right, there's a lot of shit talking that goes on, man, in those circles. I know it. I know it for a fact. Being a so-called Puerto Rican, my family that speaks pure Spanish, and they stayed in Puerto Rico. A lot of them tend to look down on us and act like we're not Puerto Rican, or so-called Puerto Rican. Okay, just so y'all can see. But somebody looking from the outside will not understand why they're calling me American. They wouldn't understand it because they don't understand the history. They don't understand the story. You see? All right. Let's see. Let's go from here. Yeah, I want to finish this. So with that understanding, we're going to read it again. John 7:35. Then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go, that we shall not find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? See? So what they're saying there, if you could understand, and I want to zoom in very clearly, man, they saying, is he going to go to those Israelites that have been living among the Gentiles and are now acting like the Gentiles? The same people that we call Gentiles but are really our own people. Oop, it's a lock, yeah. Give me 1 second. The people we call Gentiles that are really our own people, right? The diaspora, those who are dispersed among the Gentiles. You see? So, yeah, man, it's clear. All right, let's go back. I'll read it one more time. Then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go, that we shall not find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? Right? It's not saying we're going to go to the Israelites that are spread among the Gentiles and teach the actual Gentiles. No, we're going to teach the Gentiles, which are the dispersed among the Gentiles, because they are calling us Gentiles. They are calling those people who have become like the other nations. They were considered as Gentiles. They were considered unclean. They're uncircumcised. If you're unclean or uncircumcised, who was the only nation that was circumcising? The Jews. So even if you're a Jew and you ain't circumcised, and guess what? You're no longer a Jew. You a Greek. You a Roman. You a whatever. You ain't one of us. You see, that's why Paul was speaking that way. He had to get it. That's the only language the Jews knew back then. That's how he had to speak to them, because that's the way it was spoken, man. All right. And the same thing with the book of Romans, man, because you had the Greeks, the Gentiles. Okay, look, the book of Romans, the same way as we read with Corinthians. This is Romans 1:7. To all that be in Rome, right? It didn't say to the Romans. It said to all that be in Rome, beloved of the Most High, called to be saints. All right, Psalms 50:5, gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Those are the Israelites. All right, To all that be in Rome, beloved of the Most High, called to be saints, Israelites in Rome. Grace to you and peace from our Father and the Lord Yahushai Mashiach. You see? So these different books with the names of different places are just written to the Israelites who were scattered in these places, man. You see? Yeah, man. Hey, same situation like I told you earlier, man. This is the, just a basic understanding of, why the scriptures say Jews and Gentiles, right? To the Jews first and then to the Greeks, or the Jew first and then to the Gentile. Because the scripture says that the tents of Judah shall rise first, man. And that's a whole nother history behind that. You had the tribe of Judah, and then you had the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom fell away, and then the southern kingdom eventually fell away too. All right, but the Judah being the head tribe, so the term Jew, that's what people were called back then, man. And that's why Paul wasn't a Jew. Paul was a Benjamite. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, right? But it's just the language that was being spoken back then because of the situations that was happening. Okay, and if you don't understand or care to know the history, you're not going to understand the mystery. As the brothers, a great millstone always say, starting with the apostle elders. Okay, so yeah, that was just a very basic lesson about, why the scriptures, says, Gentiles in the New Testament as if, they can be saved. It's not really talking about the actual heathen nations. It's actually talking about our own people who were scattered in the heathen nations, who became like the heathen nations. Okay, so, the whole scriptures has always been dealing with the Israelites from the very beginning. From the book of Genesis to Revelation, the whole book is about the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, which are the true biblical Hebrew Israelites. Okay, and Lord's will, I'll make a part 2 to this, maybe going into Romans 11 or, some of those controversial scriptures like that, and just kind of break those down, Lord's will, through the Spirit. So with that, I pray this lesson was edifying to the hopeful elect. I want to finish by giving all glory, honor, and praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem HaKodash. Double honor to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught us this truth. A sincere shalom to the hopeful elect that's out there listening, learning, and or teaching in truth and sincerity. A shalom wa, abad babal, shalom.